evening and welcome to the 626th episode of Travel It. I'm Dan Schlossberg, and we're in the 15th season of Travel It Radio, the show that lets you enjoy the pleasures of travel from the comfort of your armchair. Every week at this time, we talk to people representing destinations, hotels, airlines, railroads, car rental companies, and others in the world of travel and hospitality, from authors and bloggers to broadcasters and publicists. If it's got anything to do with travel, it's got everything to do with Travel Itch. Our guest tonight is Tim Riley of the National Winston Churchill Museum. Welcome, Tim, to Travel Itch Radio.
Well, thanks, Dan. It's so great to be with you again.
Great to have you. You know, many people don't know that there's a National Winston Churchill Museum or that it's located at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. So please explain to our viewers.
Well, it's really an extraordinary story that the nation's Churchill Museum is in the heartland of America. It's located in Fulton, Missouri, on the campus of Westminster College. Fulton is a small town, population of 12,000, but something very big happened here. 80 years ago, on March 5th, Winston Churchill traveled with President Truman to Westminster College here in Fulton. And delivered a speech that changed the world. We know it today as the Iron Curtain speech, but it is commonly known by Churchill as the sinews of peace. This was the warning right after World War II that Churchill issued to the world from the heartland of America about an Iron Curtain descending and the threat of Soviet communism. And it really was a moment that it launched the Cold War era from the heartland. And the museum was established in Fulton really to recognize that moment, but also to recognize Churchill's entire career.
We love anniversaries on this show, and you've got a big one coming up just a week from today. It's the 80th anniversary of that speech. When he gave it on March 5th, 1946, it had a different name. Why did Churchill call it the sinews of peace?
Well, Churchill called it the sinews of peace because he believed, what are sinews? Sinews are things that bind us together, muscles, really. And when exercised, they make us stronger. And Churchill believed in alliances. Winston Churchill, I think, famously once said that the only thing worse than fighting without allies, fighting with allies is fighting without them. And he realized that the alliance of democratic nations like the United States and UK in post-World War II era that were the sinews that could bind the world together to create a more stable and lasting peace under the threat of expanding Soviet communism and the Cold War. And he used the speech at Fulton at Westminster College to warn the world that this was coming. It's really an extraordinary moment. And it's not only a warning, but it's something that lifts up the values of democracy, freedom, rule of law, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, all those values and ideals that our country holds dear. Churchill did too. And he reminded that with those values, those Western democratic values, the United States, Great Britain would persevere over the threat of Soviet communism.
And this was not the first time that Churchill warned the world about something, because he was aware of Hitler and what Hitler could do long before anybody else in England.
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite passages in the piece, the speech issued here in Fulton, was when he says, "The last time I warned and no one would listen," he said from behind the lectern that you're showing to the viewers. That warning was one that only he could make, because, as you say, in the 1930s, Churchill warned of the threat of Hitler and Nazi. He said here at Fulton, "The last time I warned and no one would listen. The war, World War II, could have been prevented without the firing of a single shot," Churchill said. And he said, "Surely, ladies and gentlemen, we must not let that happen again." So he knew who he was and what he had done, and he used his eminence as a statesman here at Fulton to warn the world of what was next.
And Tim, what was the former prime minister doing in Missouri? Wasn't he invited by Missouri native Harry Truman, who was then president?
He was indirectly. The president of Westminster College, Frank McClure, had the idea to invite Churchill. Churchill, Americans particularly forget that after the war, Churchill and the Allies won World War II. There was that famous moment after VE Day in May of 1945 when Churchill was on the balcony in London giving his V for victory sign. But he won the war, but he lost an election. Churchill, politics is a fickle game, and Churchill won the war, but he lost an election. So he was out of a job. He was no longer prime minister. And his wife, Clementine, famously said, "Winston, I think this is a blessing in disguise." And he said, "It's very effectively disguised." But he really, in that election defeat, Churchill received a typewritten letter from Westminster College president inviting him to come to give the lecture. Now, I'm convinced Churchill would have tossed that lecture or that letter aside and said, I can't come. But there was a handwritten note, as you suggest, Dan, written by President Truman that said, "This is a wonderful school in my home state. If you come, I'll introduce you." And when Churchill saw the note from the President of the United States, he knew no matter where he was in the world, that the world would tune in. And that's exactly what happened. So it was Missouri's own Harry Truman who really made that happen.
But people forget that Churchill did come back as prime minister later on, too.
He did. I think the Iron Curtain speech and his trip to Missouri was good for him. It rehabilitated his reputation in many ways. And a few years later, he was elected. Once again, his party was elected in office, and he became prime minister for a second time in 1951.
And the lectern he used and the chair that he used, not to mention the ceremonial robes that he wore, along with other Churchill artifacts, are all in your museum, right?
It is. Those items, plus I think the most extraordinary thing we have is the near final draft of the speech. In fact, we're opening a new exhibition on March 5th, the 80th anniversary of the near final draft. There are 50 pages of the speech, and you can see Churchill's last minute edits and rhetorical flourishes. I like to tell the students here at Westminster College, they're not the only ones who wait till the last minute to finish their papers. Churchill did too, and you can see his mind at work as he's ramping up the rhetoric and putting the final touches on the Iron Curtain speech. That's really our pride and joy, and that speech will be exhibited in its entirety for visitors to see beginning March 5th.
And we are talking with Tim Riley of the National Winston Churchill Museum. Tim, does the museum cover the entire scope of Churchill's life? We know there are galleries dedicated to World War I, plus extensive displays about Churchill's suspicions of Hitler, discussed with Neville Chamberlain, and appeasement politics and leadership during World War II.
It does. It's a little bit like a presidential library for British prime ministers. There really is nothing quite like it in the United States. And we do explore the entire career of Churchill. He lived to be 90 years old. He was born in 1874 and died in 1965. He was involved in the last cavalry charge of the British Empire in the 1890s. And then when he died, he was dealing with issues of the atomic bomb. It's an extraordinary lifetime. And we cover that all in the museum here. It's really a great way to learn about this fascinating leader.
And speaking of Germany, chunks of the Berlin Wall wound up at the Churchill Museum too, thanks to the granddaughter of the prime minister. Didn't she turn those blocks into a famous sculpture?
Yes, I think it's important to realize and mention that the Churchill Museum doesn't end covering Churchill's legacy, at 1965 when he died. But the words that Churchill spoke in the Iron Curtain speech and during those great war speeches of World War II linger on. Churchill is the most quoted politician, it seems, even today in the media. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the concrete manifestation of the Iron Curtain that Churchill warned about in 1899, really marking the end of the Cold War era, Edwina Sands, a sculptor, a wonderful, brilliant artist, said, I want to make a sculpture of the Berlin Wall, and I want to put it on the campus where Grandpapa gave the speech. Edwina was Winston Churchill's granddaughter, and she did. And so we have these 8 sections of the Berlin Wall, and it carved through. You can actually break through. There's these silhouettes of an abstract male and female figure, and this formidable barrier that once divided Western freedom with communist tyranny. You can break through that barrier, and Edwina erected this sculpture on our campus. President Reagan was actually the one who dedicated the sculpture on the first anniversary of the wall, November 9th, 1990. President Reagan was here. So again, history keeps happening. It's not just Churchill's life, but his enduring legacy that is celebrated at the museum with monuments like the Berlin Wall and other speakers and other events that keep happening here.
Winston Churchill's wife, Clementine Spencer Churchill, is also remembered at the museum. There's a reading and research room named in her honor. Please tell us.
Yes, it seems like there are over 1,000 different biographies of Winston Churchill. He's one of the most written about historical figures. I always tell my colleagues in history, if you want to make money selling books on history, you should write about Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, or Jesus. Those are the big three. And the library here contains books about Winston Churchill, and of course he was a prodigious author. I mean, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the 1950s, and we have all of his volumes in the library too. It's a great reading room for people who come to visit, the scholars and visitors who are interested in learning about Churchill to use the library. It's a non-circulating library, but it's a great resource for those wanting to learn and dig deeper into Churchill's life and his legacy.
And Tim, do visitors to your museum feel like they're soldiers on the Western Front, or survivors of the London Blitz, or viewers of Nazi propaganda films?
All of the above. You can walk through a World War I trench, as Churchill did. He was the first Lord of the Admiralty to begin the First World War. And then after a disastrous campaign in 1915 in the Dardanelles, he was forced to resign his position in somewhat of a disgrace. And he did what few leaders would do today. He voluntarily went into the trenches and became Lieutenant Colonel Churchill and rehabilitated his reputation, but also fought bravely on the Western Front. So you can experience that. You can also experience a little bit about the rise of Hitler in the 1930s and the Nazi Party. These were things that Churchill saw coming and warned the world, or at least anyone who would listen, in the 1930s, that Hitler was something to be reckoned with. And unfortunately, the policy of the day in Britain and America, too, was one of appeasement. And there wasn't a willingness to go to war again after World War I. But you can experience that viscerally in the gallery devoted to the 1930s as well. It's an immersion into history.
Well, the famous quote from Neville Chamberlain was "Peace in our time."
Right, really. And Churchill said no. He said there won't be. Hitler is not someone to be reckoned with.
And there are also pictures of Churchill in London, I guess it's during the Blitz, where he says, "Never give in."
Yeah, that was one of his famous attitudes: never give in, never, never, never. He was emphatic about that, and you will experience here at the museum a gallery devoted to the Blitz. And the largest work in our collection is where I'm actually seated now. It was a victim of that Blitz. It was the Church of St. Mary Aldermanbury, built in London in the 1670s by Christopher Wren. It was bombed in the Blitz. It was nearly all but destroyed and firebombed in 1940, left in ruins until the plucky leadership at Westminster College said, we really ought to do something to commemorate Winston Churchill and the speech he gave here in 1946. So in the 1960s, they removed the ruined church from central London and rebuilt it in total in mid-Missouri on the campus to honor Churchill. It's really an audacious move, but it's something that is an eyewitness to that Blitz.
Well, didn't the church actually originate in the 12th century, and then the Great Fire of London burned it down, and then it was rebuilt?
It has a long history of building and rebuilding. You're absolutely right. The earliest traces of the church were 12th century. It was the Church of Shakespeare. He lived a block away when he lived in London. Two of Shakespeare's actors who published the first folio of Shakespeare's plays were the lay leaders of this church. And as you rightly suggest, it was destroyed for the first time in 1666 during the Great Fire of London. And it was rebuilt by Christopher Wren in the 1670s, only to be destroyed again by the Germans in 1940. So it has a nickname, the Phoenix of Aldermanbury, because it keeps rising from the ashes. And that's very much true in this case.
With so many different dimensions, how big is the Churchill Museum and how much time should visitors allow to experience it?
Yeah, I always tell visitors to plan on a few hours, and it won't be time wasted. There's a lot to read, see, watch videos, hear, listen, study. We can even explore Churchill and his legacy by looking at some of his paintings. He was an oil painter, so we can look at the many facets and the many seasons of Churchill at the museum. So I encourage people to spend at least a few hours when they come to see the museum, and of course spend some time in this beautiful sanctuary, rebuilt, the Christopher Wren Sanctuary, rebuilt in Fulton, as it was in London in the 1670s. And then of course take a stroll outside if the weather's nice, and break through the Berlin Wall. Here's a little bit of everything.
Well, Tim, I remember in the days of the Newseum, which was in Washington, it's not there anymore, but it was there, they had recordings of Edward R. Murrow reporting on the London Blitz. And I
Right.
thought he was doing it from a dangerous position on top of a building while everything was burning up around him. But Churchill actually went out with the people while London was being bombed, trying to
Yeah.
reassure them.
When many of the Londoners were going underground to escape the bombs, Churchill was going to the rooftops and looking to survey the land. He was a man of action and wanted to be there. You mentioned Edward R. Murrow, the great American journalist who was broadcasting during the Blitz. After the war, he was recounting Churchill's leadership and said that Churchill mobilized the English language and sent it into battle. I think it's a great phrase, those great wartime speeches. And of course, later on, the Iron Curtain speech here in 1946, Churchill was a master wordsmith. Murrow knew it. And those words, did help shape and craft and inspire a nation to victory.
How difficult was it to move all the stones of the church from London to Fulton?
It took a decade to do, from conception in 1961, when the college decided this audacious plan to do it, to raise funds. It took a national effort on our part of this country. President Kennedy was the first chairman of the project. When he was killed, President Johnson stepped up. President Truman and Eisenhower came out of retirement, and a nation came together to honor Churchill. And funds were raised, permissions granted. The college here had to obtain permission from the City of London, but also the Diocese of London, to remove this project. And really, in 1966, the stones came over after they were carefully numbered and dismantled in London, and slowly, stone by stone, the church was rebuilt in Fulton. And you can see it today. We've just the picture you're showing now is a couple of years old, but we've just cleaned the stone. We've spent approximately $6 million on preservation of this wonderful old building, and it looks remarkable. It really does. It's worth preserving, and we've done that, and we're looking forward to sharing that with our guests who continue to come in record numbers to learn about Churchill here at America's National Churchill Museum.
Tim, how much did this massive project cost, and where did the money come from?
The money was privately raised, really, from across the United States, and it was in the 1960s. It was roughly $1.5 million of 1960s money, so a handsome sum, and it's something that stands. It's a bold move. It's very audacious. It's very Churchillian, to have an idea and execute and do something that everyone thinks is impossible, but that's what they did. And as I say, we continue to invest in the preservation of this, but also the exhibitions and programs to make sure that the lessons of leadership that we can still gain from someone like Winston Churchill, against the lessons of resilience, of democratic values, all of these things remain as important as true in our time as they did in Churchill's. So it's money and investment well worth doing.
You're watching Travel Itch Radio with Dan Schlossberg. Find the archive show on YouTube, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, X, and Facebook. And we're talking with Tim Riley of the National Winston Churchill Museum in Fulton, Missouri. Tim, the church has a colorful history of its own. You mentioned founded in the 12th century, able to survive civil wars, the Reformation, the Restoration, the Great Fire of London, although it was rebuilt, burned again after Nazi bombs hit. How long did it stand as a ruin before it was saved?
It was bombed on December 29th, 1940, and stood in ruins until the 1960s for over 20 years in London. It was an eyesore. It was just a rubble, a stone shell of its former self. The post-war economy in Britain was such that the British couldn't afford to rebuild it. They really couldn't afford to take it down, Dan. And so when the college here called and said, we'd like to bring it over to mid-Missouri, they thought probably we're a little bit bonkers, but we did, and we had it. It does have a colorful history, and it's a history that keeps repeating itself. I mean, we continue to have world leaders travel to the museum, to Fulton, to follow in Churchill's footsteps, to speak in the church or on the campus in front of the Berlin Wall. I think, the end of the Cold War happened here too. President Reagan, as I mentioned earlier, dedicated the breakthrough sculpture of the Berlin Wall, only to have Mikhail Gorbachev follow him to Fulton a year and a half later. And he spoke as well in front of the Berlin Wall. And Margaret Thatcher was here. It's a who's who of world history that have followed Churchill to Westminster College to speak. So it's a colorful history indeed.
Tim, we understand that the fire warden who watched the church burn built the organ and assured the authenticity of the interior. So how many deviations were there from the original design of Christopher Wren in the 17th century?
When Christopher Wren said, and I'm paraphrasing here, nothing is more beautiful than light. And you can actually see it behind me for those who are reviewing this cast. The light that comes in these clear windows it bathes the interior in this beautiful, beautiful shade of white. It's something that wasn't really the case when the church was bombed in 1940. By then, the church had been Victorianized, as I like to say. There were stained glass additions put in, and it was much darker than it is today. And when the church was rebuilt here, the decision was made to bring it back as Christopher Wren might have recognized it. So this is a true rebuild to the 1670s and does not take into account some of the 19th century additions and changes that were made in London. So it really is. In fact, visitors from London who come and visit our Wren church say, yours looks better than ours in some respects because it's truer to Wren's original concept. So it's unlike anything else in the world, really.
Churchill had to be one of the most colorful world leaders before, during, and after the Second World War. On an episode of Hogan's Heroes that I saw last week, there was a rumor that the Nazis wanted to assassinate him, and Newkirk, played by Richard Dawson, said, the war wouldn't be the same without him.
It wouldn't have been, and thank goodness for that. I think Churchill's heroics, his audaciousness, his steadfastness in the face of adversity, and this is a theme that occurs from time to time in his life. Equipped him to not only wage the war but win the war. I mean, we forget that Britain, from 1939 until December of 1941, was virtually fighting alone, and Hitler very well could have invaded across the Channel and taken England and Britain. And Churchill rallied his forces with language, wooed President Roosevelt and the Americans to lend some aid, and then finally, after Pearl Harbor, the Allies really became a force in Europe, and the tide began slowly to turn. But without Churchill, I don't think that would have happened. I mean, he stood fast at a time when his nation and the world needed him most.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of his famous quotes was about the RAF, never has so few done so much for so many.
Yes. I mean, he recognized the bravery of those RAF pilots. In fact, the church here is the official chapel of the Eagle Squadrons. The Eagle Squadrons were the American pilots who flew with the RAF. In fact, there were a number of Americans who went over to Britain to fight in the Battle of Britain even before the United States entered the war. They were actually fighting for a foreign power under penalty of treason. But these American patriots were keen on taking the fight to Hitler and fought with him. So those few that Churchill warned about included the Eagle squadrons of the Americans. And there's even a Royal Air Force ensign, a flag, down in the corner of the church. I don't know if you can see it, but where to honor those brave pilots.
Tim, just last year, U.S. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri introduced a bill that would make the Winston Churchill Museum a National Historic Landmark. What's the status of that legislation?
It's a great question, Dan. In December, the Hawley legislation passed the Senate unanimously, which was terrific. I mean, what passes unanimously these days in any Congress, let alone this one? And next week, the House of Representatives will take up the bill, and it's expected, knock on wood, to pass there. I think Churchill will be very pleased that the United States Congress, a body that he held in extremely high regard, still remembers him. And I'm confident that in the very near future, Dan, one of the oldest buildings in the United States will become the nation's newest National Historic Landmark. So watch Congress for news in the next few weeks.
It would be great if they passed it on the 80th anniversary next week.
I've let everybody know that that's the case, and a couple of congressmen said, it's nice to have a deadline, and another one said, and it's a real deadline, isn't it? And I said, absolutely. Yes. So we'll see. March 5th is a big day, and we'll hope that the Congress will come together and once again honor this great statesman and this building and this legacy and everything that he's done to preserve the freedoms in the Western world, and honor that. I think it would be a very fitting 80th anniversary present.
Tim, is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like to add?
Oh, well, I think, I just encourage everybody to come and can see us and take in this history. One of the things I tell our team here all the time, and I think visitors walk away believing it, that if history seems old, we're not doing our job. So, this is something that you can experience the past in a way and learn the lessons of the past through leaders like Churchill, and to help us make important decisions for today, because the future, I like to say, we're in the future business. The students and teachers who come and experience and learn these lessons will apply them in years to come. I think that would have pleased Churchill greatly. And I think that everybody who visits the museum gets a little dose of that every time they visit.
And how do Travelwitch viewers learn more about the National Winston Churchill Museum?
I think the easiest and one-stop shop is our website, nationalchurchillmuseum.org. We have all the information about the museum, schedules, admission programs, the whole lot is there.
And before we let you go, how do people get to Fulton, Missouri?
Well, if you're Churchill, you take a train with the president across the country. Or if you're a church, you take it stone by stone across the Atlantic Ocean. There are a lot of ways to get here, but the easiest way, we're about a 90-minute drive from St. Louis, or Columbia, Missouri, where the University of Missouri is 20 minutes away. Same with the capital of Missouri, Jefferson City. So it's very easy to get to. It's a small rural community, but it's worth the trip. Worth the trip indeed.
Our guest this evening on Travelwitch has been Tim Ryan of the National Winston Churchill Museum in Fulton, Missouri. Thank you, Tim, for joining us. Great show.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thanks for all of your support. And we hope to see you back here one day soon.
I would like that. And listeners, now that baseball is back, share the excitement with a copy of my biggest and best book, The New Baseball Bible, 480 pages for a little more than a sawbuck. Such a deal. It's an oversized, illustrated, unorthodox history of America's national pastime that's both a coffee table book and a bathroom book. Read it backwards and still enjoy it. That's The New Baseball Bible with Shohei Ohtani on the cover. Get it from Amazon.com tonight. And that's it for this edition of Travelwitch. We're off next week, but return on Thursday, March 12th with Sarah Browers of the Theodore Roosevelt Library and Museum. Now, this is Dan Schlossberg saying thank you for your time this time. Until next time, good night.